Here's a fun fact. I have repeatedly dreamed that I have Spider-Man's powers. What do you think that means? It's like over and over, I dream that I'm Spider-Man. I'd really like to know what that means. What's shaken bacons? I know I am late with this review. I was not able to see it until about 10 p.m. last night, which was 4th of July, and then I had to get up early for work this morning, and I am recording this to get out to you as soon as I can after work. So you'll have to forgive me if I am really tired or I seem out of it. I suspect most of you have seen this film already, so I'm going to have a brief non-spoilers discussion at the beginning, give you my rating, and then I'm going to move on to spoilers. So I will give you warning before I get into spoilers so you can scooch if you don't want to be spoiled if you have not seen this yet. Spider-Man Far From Home was directed by Jon Watts, and it was written by Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers. Far From Home is the official wrap-up of this arc of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So there's a lot of eyes on this. It felt odd that they had made that choice because Endgame felt like such a final concluding factor. We had some major deaths. We had the loss of Tony Stark, we had the loss of, effectively, of Captain America. We had the loss of Black Widow. And so it seemed a little odd that it would end with Far From Home. But Far From Home serves as the launching point for the next arc of the MCU and where they're going to be taking the characters that we are left with. In the setting of Far From Home, the world is still recovering from what they call the blip, and as this is a Spider-Man movie, it centers around Peter Parker, who, during a summer class trip throughout Europe, encounters a new threat and a new hero, Mysterio. Peter gets pulled in by Nick Fury to work with Mysterio as the Avengers are mysteriously unavailable to help out against this new threat of these elementals. Throughout which the film explores the emotional trauma and what we could probably pretty well define as post-traumatic stress disorder that Peter Parker is suffering from the experiences of Infinity War, from losing Tony, from having to deal with a changed world from when he came back from being dusted by Thanos. In addition to PTSD, Peter Parker is also very emotionally torn in this film over the responsibility that he feels on his shoulders from Tony Stark's passing and what his role is going to be with the Avengers and with Tony out of the picture from now on. Anyway, this is a fun film. It is. And there's a lot of buildup at the end of the film that actually makes you want to continue to be invested in the Marvel films if somehow you were not already. It is a fun film, even though you spend most of this movie feeling bad for Peter Parker and what he's going through both emotionally and what he goes through with the villains in the movie. There are some fairly stellar comedic moments in this film, although there are other places that the movie does fall flat. And in areas, the editing actually left some things to be desired. They did make some really good decisions in this movie that are on display. I think the biggest example of that is Mysterio's costume, because that globe could have made him look like a Doofosaurus Rex, just like what they did, just absolutely recreating Black Manta's costume in Aquaman. But what they did with Mysterio, I think, was really cool. It modernized it, and that's what I was talking about back in my Aquaman review. There are things that they can do to make the costumes not quite seem as dated and make them a little more modern, and they did such a cool job with that with Mysterio. There's one scene where Mysterio's globe kind of turns into this world inside of it, and it's so interestingly well done. Whenever I think about Mysterio's portrayal in this film, I keep thinking about that moment. So that's just one example of some of the decisions that they made modernizing this movie that I thought were very well handled. Acting was, for the large part, great from all parties. Tom Holland is by far my favorite Spider-Man that we've received to date, by far, and that continues with this movie. I will say Jake Gyllenhaal was not as charismatic as I would have expected him to be as Mysterio, and I don't know if that is actually because I think Tom Holland is just so perfectly cast as Spider-Man, in my personal opinion, that he actually tends to overshadow other actors that are with him in scenes. And every scene where it was just Mysterio on his own, I felt like Jake Gyllenhaal did a good job. But in the scenes where it was Jake Gyllenhaal with Tom Holland, I actually felt like Tom Holland overshadowed him. And I think that's a great compliment to Tom Holland. And I think that that's just very interesting because Jake Gyllenhaal is not a bad actor. I mean, he's well known. He's got a good repertoire, but I just thought that was interesting. He did a good job in the role, and I don't think he did a bad job. I just think he was overshadowed in the scenes that he shared with other actors. The soundtrack was exciting. It complemented every scene. Nothing felt jarring or out of place. The pacing was well handled. And they did a really great job in this movie of highlighting the emotional and mental distress that Peter Parker was going through. And I think in addition to doing a great job of highlighting that, they drew a lot of parallels with his mindset to when Tony Stark first experienced the breach with the Avengers movie in 2012. And I think they were using that very deliberately to show the continuity and the similarities between Tony and between Peter as each of them kind of found themselves thrust into this role. Granted, Peter was thrust into the role by Tony, or at least in his mind he is, but it's very interesting to see those parallels and those connections drawn between the original hero that's kind of started the Marvel Cinematic Universe and our new hero who is wondering if he's going to be the one to continue on the universe. I liked this film far better than I liked Spider-Man Homecoming. Was not doing movie reviews when Spider-Man Homecoming came out. I am one of the few people that don't like Spider-Man Homecoming. I felt like Spider-Man Homecoming had to balance the classic ethos of Peter Parker as Spider-Man in that there is a lot of drama because he's a younger character and he's trying to reconcile his identity as a superhero. And Spider-Man Homecoming for me was so centered on the teen drama that I could not get into it. I just couldn't. I'm aware a lot of people love that movie. If you love it, I'm not saying that's a problem. For me, it was just a little too heavy-handed in that one area. This movie, I felt, did a way better job at striking a balance between the teen drama part of it and reconciling Peter's personal life and him trying to be normal and him learning who he is still because he's still very young, and then showing him growing and coming into his own and dealing with very adult, mature themes that come along with being a superhero and having to make those tough choices and come to a realization that you're never going to fully be able to invest in either life while you have both going on. And I think this film did a great job at striking that balance and showing that off. Even though most of the movie is quite predictable and they do fall into some of these stereotypical superhero movie tropes, except for the crucial post-credit scenes. There are 2 post-credit scenes that you need to stick around to see, or the entire movie and the ongoing Marvel Cinematic Universe are not going to make any sense at all. And I do feel like that's something that they should have kind of broadcast more widely, because in the theater that I was in, people got up and left. And if they are going to see a Marvel movie at 10 p.m. at night on the 4th of July, odds are they care enough about the storyline that they took the time to do that. And those people did not realize, they probably thought it was just going to be like Nick Fury making a pager to Captain Marvel type of post-credit scene again, and it's not. Large parts of the movie and the ongoing cinematic universe will not make sense if you do not stick around to see both of those post-credit scenes. One is fairly soon after the movie concludes. The other is after what feels like an endless freaking eternity of credits. I don't remember the last time there was that many credits rolling in a movie, and I was about to lose my mind because it was after midnight, and I was like, oh my God, please just show us the last post-credit scene. But I think there were so many because they featured so many different countries. Anyway, my final verdict for Spider-Man Far From Home is we have an overwhelming surplus of bacon with this one. You should definitely go see it in theaters. Stick around to see the post-credit scenes. It is worth seeing, especially if you are a Marvel fan. Now we're going to talk about spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled, make sure that you scooch. Scooch! In traditional Marvel fashion, I think that they did a good job of making sure that the trailer does not give away too many items. So let's talk about the full plot first. As previously mentioned, Peter is definitely struggling from PTSD. He receives Edith from Tony Stark, whose hubris continues on after his passing, and which deeply amuses me in that he just decides he's going to pick the next him. I love Tony Stark. And what also really amused me is there is this gold, pure movie gold of this high school created tribute to the fallen Avengers in the beginning of the movie. It is absolutely hilarious. That alone is worth the price of the ticket. And I know that's saying a lot. It was the funniest thing, but it was also touching at the same time. I kind of was like a little, looking at it. It's pure gold. Pure comedic gold. So Tony has evidently chosen Peter to step into his shoes as the next Iron Man. And Peter, as a young man, is currently emotionally traumatized, trying to struggle and cope with what's been going on. And doesn't know what to do with himself, basically. So he's like, peace, I'm out. I'm going to go on a field trip over the summer through Europe. He just wants to vacation and he wants time to crush on MJ. That's all he wants. But Nick Fury tracks him down in Europe. Since not every Marvel movie can stick to New York, we need to feature other parts of the entire planet sometimes, okay? So this is when they decided to do it, was during a class field trip. Nick enlists him to fight the Elementals alongside a new hero, who's Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. After fighting a few of these Elementals, Peter decides that Mysterio is better suited to take on the legacy of Tony Stark and hands over control of Edith to him to step into that role. Surprise, surprise! As we all know, Mysterio's not a good guy and is orchestrating the entire thing so he can get the recognition for himself that he feels he deserves. During one of their last fights with the Fire Elemental, MJ discovers part of the holographic tech that got knocked off of one of the droids that Mysterio is using to actually project the monsters, which helps his illusions. And she and Peter discover together that Mysterio's identity as a hero is false. Peter goes to stop Mysterio and in the process has to confront his own demons, as well as those projected into him by Mysterio. Near the end of the movie, which is honestly the best part of this film, he comes to peace within himself with his situation, who he is and what's happening, and he steps forward into Tony's shoes. After the confrontation, we get some fairly cringy but kind of cute scenes between MJ and Peter while they swing around the city, which is a far cry from the mannequin and hair blowing in the opposite direction that we got from the original Spider-Man trilogy. And then in our post-credit scenes, we get the reveal that Mysterio and his team had manipulated the audio and the visual of their confrontation to make it appear that Peter is trying to subvert expectations of everyone, and he is forcibly taking over as Iron Man's place, and he killed Mysterio for opposing him. In addition to that, he outs Peter Parker's identity, so now the world knows that he is Spider-Man. And we conclude with seeing that Nick Fury and his team were not actually the real Nick Fury, but were Skrulls. The real Nick Fury is evidently out in space somewhere, heading away on a mission. Now, I think that this movie took some departures, and I mean, it's continuing to build on departures from the standard Spider-Man characterizations. I think really the biggest example is MJ. I personally like what they are doing with this iteration of MJ quite a lot. She's not the standard redhead traditional MJ, but I really like that with this Peter, they've made him, I feel, a little kind of goofier, and he's still very socially awkward, and he still demonstrates those facets of intelligence that Peter Parker is known for. But because he's a little goofier and a little more playful, and in some ways a little more innocent, I think, I like that this MJ is created as a sort of foil to that, but it's in a good way. Her character is a little more grounded. She's got some really funny kind of dark humor to her, and I particularly enjoy that about Zendaya's portrayal of MJ. And I'm glad that they went in that direction. Overall, I really like this movie, but there are some writing issues and there's some inconsistencies and things that don't exactly make sense. They explain the entire background of Mysterio and his team by monologuing.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
It took so long to have Jake Gyllenhaal standing in this bar explaining to everyone who already know who already knew who everyone else was, who everyone was. And it was purely done because they had to retcon the characters in order to make the storyline work and make Mysterio's motivations viable. And honestly, I don't think it lended any plausibility to his motivations. And I kind of felt like as a villain's background and the way they set it up with that kind of lazy writing with the monologue and everything, I honestly feel like it's lazy. It just feels like retconning, and I'm not a fan of how they handled it. I'm just not. I mean, it was fairly predictable. That's part of the writing for this film. You kind of know exactly from the beginning where it's going to go. You already know Mysterio's bad, and you can kind of just guess immediately. And there are a few things you can't guess. Like you can't immediately, you know something's wrong with Nick Fury because we know Nick Fury. So throughout the film, you're like, what is wrong with Nick? Like, why doesn't he just get it? He's not getting it. And we find out at the end it's because it's not actually Nick, it's someone filling in for Nick. It's the Skrulls filling in for him while he's off doing something else. But largely, this movie is very predictable. You know exactly where it's going to go. And because of that, it becomes, to a degree, almost campy. It's not a bad kind of campy, but the predictability that comes with it reminds me a lot of the older style of superhero films and is kind of disappointing to see in the Marvel film of this caliber these days. That's not to say it's not still enjoyable. I still really like this movie. I gave it an overwhelming surplus of bacon rating. But I do think that the writing left a little bit to be desired in this one. Although I will say that they acknowledged that to a degree. Like when, like the Elementals plot line, the whole time I was like, this is the dumbest plot line. This is not going to be the actual plot line. There's no way. This is too dumb. There's got to be, like, it's going to be Mysterio, but how? And of course, they have then Mysterio reveal in a dialogue poking fun at the fact that that's too ridiculous and people will believe anything these days. So I like that they did a call out specifically discussing that. The illusions within this movie were overwhelming, but they were cool. They were very cool. The entire sequence where Mysterio was manipulating Peter's reality around him was incredibly interesting. The problem is, throughout the entirety of the movie, there were too many illusions. Everything in this film felt like it was a stinking illusion. It was like illusionception. Nick Fury wasn't Nick Fury, because Nick Fury was Mysterio, and then Nick Fury was Nick Fury as Mysterio again, and then Nick Fury you thought was Nick Fury, but then Nick Fury was actually a Skrull, and then you thought Nick Fury was on vacation. Psych! Nick Fury is not on vacation. Nick Fury is in another illusion because he's actually on a spaceship. And your reality as you're watching this movie keeps getting disrupted because you start wondering, like, is this also an illusion? I don't know what I'm looking at right now. I'm trying to understand what is happening. And whenever you have that many disruptions in what's going on with a film and you're constantly questioning the storyline and whether or not what you're seeing is actually like the plot line or is the continuity thread of the movie, it disrupts you and it jolts you out of the movie viewing experience, at least in my opinion. And you kind of leave yourself, or you kind of leave the world of the movie because you're in your own head trying to figure out what's going on. And I think for that reason, they went a little overboard with just how many things they threw in as an illusion in this movie. And granted, I know it's a movie about Mysterio, but I think they went just like a smidge too far. I absolutely loved, by the way, seeing J.K. Simmons as Jonah Jameson at the end. I am so glad they brought it back as Jonah Jameson. He's like the quintessential perfect Jonah Jameson. I really hope that he continues to show up in his traditional role at the Daily Bugle in the MCU going forward, because I'm so happy to see him in this movie. And as we continue talking about, the end scenes, I can't make up my mind personally whether or not Peter is going to be or is intended to be the next Tony Stark, because the whole movie, it seemed like they were setting him up to be, and then the end with the reveal where he's set up as like the bad guy who's trying to take over as Tony makes me wonder if that's the device that they're going to use to remove that responsibility from his shoulders. What do you guys think? Do you think he is being set up to be the next Iron Man? Because I remember there was rumors that Captain Marvel was supposed to be the next Iron Man, but it almost feels like they're just keeping Captain Marvel like in their back pocket as an option or as a side character. I don't think that they're going to make Captain Marvel as prominent as most of us thought that they were, which is not a bad thing. I think that character is way too overpowered to make a lot of compelling films based on her character. But I'm curious about whether or not they're going to continue on and actually make it Peter Parker, or if they're going to kind of turn to someone else based on what happened with this end scene. And I'm wondering, it's actually very possible that Mysterio's not dead. We saw that William guy pull out the thumb drive from when he was in the Stark Tech. So it makes me wonder if they have a copy of it, or they have a back door that they were able to leave like a little key into the Stark Tech. And so Mysterio and his team are going to continue to be major threats and villains going forward. It could have been an illusion to help discredit Spider-Man and further enhance Mysterio's reputation and further his agenda that way. It'd be interesting to see where they go with that character, because I can't imagine that's the end of him. And I also want to know where the heck Fury is at the end. He's just out in space. Like, what are they doing? I'm so intrigued to see what they're doing. I'm wondering if they're going to bring in more with the Kree, especially since they had the Skrulls impersonating them throughout this film. It'll be very interesting to see where they go with this. And you guys should tell me what your thoughts are, because I have a lot of question marks. So I want to hear your theories. So make sure you leave a comment with your theory down below. Anyway, I think that's going to wrap it up for now. I've been rambling, I think, and I'm starting to lose it from being awake so late last night and getting up so early this morning. So tell me what you thought of the film in the comments down below, what your personal rating for it was. And in the meantime, I hope you are all having a wonderful start to your weekend and a wonderful summer so far. I'll catch you later.